I think we're good to go now. We have 1 hour, and I think immediately afterwards there is also a session starting from Gitcoin, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're actually going to have our own Gitcoin Grants live stream in an hour. So you guys, I'll probably show you going over there.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So thanks everybody for being here. As we announced via various channels, we have 2 amazing applications for Gitcoin Grants at the moment for token engineering work. And we decided to host this session to discuss quadratic voting and funding, actually, quadratic funding, and dive a little bit deeper into that mechanisms. Of course, introduce the projects. And therefore, I'm very glad we have Jeff and Griff from Common Stack and Michael from CatCat, and also his teammate Chris. And yeah, to show and tell what they are up to, and then finally show you how to contribute and also team up in contributing, and then hopefully see how we can move the needle together. Some important facts on the funding. So you can contribute, everybody who's here in this call, you can contribute tonight. You still have time until January 21st. So it doesn't matter when you contribute, actually, it's just important that you contribute. Okay, so let's go and maybe have first a brief introduction of the 2 projects. Common Stack. Maybe Jeff, can you give us a brief overview on Common Stack itself and what
Sure.
up for the grant?
Yeah, so the Common Stack is a larger effort around building design patterns for interoperable DAO components. So we have like governance components, funding components, monitoring components, which actually includes CatCAD as well.
It's still a bit broken, Jeff. Maybe.
Oh, is it? How's it now? I'm having some issues with my mic. It's a running joke in the comments.
Just one.
Yeah. And Griff, feel free to jump in if my audio is that bad. Feel free to explain. Okay, cool. So what we're funding with this grant is actually kind of a common simulator. We want to make it tangible, the infrastructure that we're building. So we want to provide a game that allow people to play with all the parameters of the Common Stack system and then simulate and see, did they provide sustainable funding for their public good of choice? So we realized that the Common Stack is a little bit of a project to wrap your head around. So if we can give people a tool, a game, where they can play with the various components of the Common Stack, play with the parameters, and run some simulations, and the game will output whether they succeeded in providing sustainable funding for their community, or if they need to go back and change some parameters around. So Griff has actually been leading that community effort, so maybe you want to go into a bit more detail.
Yeah. If how much time do I have? Like maybe 2 minutes?
3 minutes. Yeah.
3. Oh man. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So the Common Stack is, in short, it's a internal economy wrapped in a bonding curve to interact with the external economy. And so as the internal economy grows, the value of the bonding curve, the value inside the bonding curve goes up. And so we can correlate the success of the internal economy with a price. And this allows us to do some really cool incentive games. But the real gem is actually doing public work. So with this common simulator, we can show people how token bonding curves work, how conviction voting works, and how they can be teamed together to actually start producing value for a public good. And so our goal is to actually get some real funds in here to make this a really fun game. And people will have different options to choose. They can choose to fund token engineering research, or they can choose to fund alternative energy research, or any kind of project. Well, we're going to have at least 5 different choices for them to choose from. And then they will be walked through a narrative story where they get to tune the parameters of the commons that they're building. They'll just get 2 choices for every screen, but if they want to go wild, there'll be a little advanced bar so they can see all the different parameters they can tune. And in this way, we can let people learn about the common stack and learn about using token engineering to fund public goods, and at the same time, learn about the powers of cadCAD and how modeling and optimizing these systems before you deploy them live can really make an impact on speeding up the development. And so, so yeah, that's the goal. We have a weekly meeting on Tuesdays in our decentralized dev team channel, where it's a complete community effort of people who are building this. And that's great, like for sure. It's been all volunteers so far, but to finish the project and actually end up with a really good product that people want to use and that can inspire the innovators out here to start playing with bonding curves and building governance methods from first principles, we're going to need funding to go to a real designer and like really finish the project with top-notch work, you know? So yeah, that's the general idea of the grant.
Okay, brilliant. Before we go deeper into that, Michael, would you be so kind to introduce CatCat, which is the second project applying for a Gitcoin grant?
Sure. So the CatCat project on Gitcoin is actually very much about community engagement and about education and building tutorials. So what we found is that CAD-CAD, which stands for Complex Adaptive Dynamics Computer Aided Design, is actually kind of a lot for people to grasp. The people who use it well have really used it well. And that's sort of tautological in the sense that you kind of already have to know about dynamical systems and quite a bit of sort of game theory and agent-based modeling in order to get the full power out of it. We have, as a team, built out a series of tutorials we call the Robot in Marbles, which is a bit like our version of the Iris data set in scikit-learn, where we have a pretty general tool, but we want to use the same core example to help people learn the different features. So we do sort of initially, how do you configure a model in the first place? So how the API works, and then we get into things like A/B testing and Monte Carlo experiments, and start to show off how to use the scientific features of the modeling paradigm. But again, we continue to face this this sort of break between the people who have like what I would call engineering backgrounds. There's a reason we talk about this as token engineering, is that turns out the coding is not the hard part at all. Like once you get the syntax, it's like really you're just putting a little bit of business logic in the right place and then seeing the consequences of your design and what your assumptions are about the world that your design is living in. And we basically want to build out more material that will help people learn to do that. And for us, that does still mean developing code. It's just example code. And we have two types that we want to do out of the grant. One is we'll almost certainly have some new bounties around incrementing the marbles to the Robot in Marbles tutorial series. Marcus and I have planned out just a continual, like, incremental here, learn something, but we haven't really had the free resources. Up to this point, just like everything that we've built has been totally subsidized by Block Science. So our team is basically adding to this repo for general use when we can make time or have the funds. So it's actually been a major goal for us to engage the community more and try to hopefully use the seed of the code itself, the documentation and the tutorials. There's actually even some videos explaining some of the tutorials, get them out to a slightly larger community who can build on it, make tutorials and examples based on things that they care about. I personally have a hacked version of a SourceGrid tutorial floating around somewhere that I would love to see matured into a full-fledged tutorial. Anyway, so point is, the grant is going to be used to start making bounties for new notebooks that will be like in the repo for people to learn from, to clone and mutate. And we want to make sure that essentially funnels back out to people to decide what they think we need to do. And to bootstrap that, we're going to basically make bounties and write acceptance criteria to help people learn how to do this.
Yeah, brilliant. I think this is the amazing thing about both projects, that the money should be collected via Gitcoin is funneled back to the community to get people engaged and to also leverage the awesome knowledge and ambitions in our community. So keep this in mind. I think let's now take a closer look to Quadratic Funding. So what does it exactly do? So as we already mentioned, it's important to have as many individual supporters as possible to help funding the grant. And this is really relevant. So maybe, Michael, could you briefly give an overview on Quadratic Funding? And then Jason is also welcome to assist here and to tell us more how this is implemented at Gitcoin.
Or maybe,
Kevin,
maybe Iwaki wants to introduce that.
Yeah, I think you should spread the talking.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So the question is just what is Quadratic Funding? I guess we'll start from there and then we can break into discussion.
Good idea.
All right. So show of hands, has anyone read Vitalik and Glenn's paper on CLR, Constrained Capital Liberal Radicalism? That's actually more people than I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, we're token engineering, right?
Yeah, true that. Okay, got to know your audience. Yeah, so so basically, Quadratic Funding is just a mechanism that funds projects not only. So there's a matching pool that's set aside, and in a normal one-to-one match, if you contributed $100 to Project A, then it would get matched with $100 from the matching pool. But Glenn and Vitalik and others feel like that sort of unfairly tilts the matching pool towards whales, people who have a lot of funding. And what they wanted to do is design a mechanism that allows us to fund projects that a broad swath of the community actually cares about. So they designed Quadratic Funding, also known as Constrained Capital Liberal Radicalism. And basically the way it works is that when you're calculating the matching funds, you not only calculate how much money a project has raised, but the breadth of contributions. So to take it back to my original example, if Project A raises $100 from one donor and Project B raises $10 from 10 donors, adding up to $100, then Project B will be matched by way more funds from the matching pool. And there's a formula for exactly what the matching looks like, and it sort of changes over time, and it increases until the projects have raised as much money as the matching funds are available, and then it becomes a little bit more of a zero-sum game once the whole matching funds are depleted. So about this time last year, we had just launched Gitcoin Grants, which you can basically understand as a Patreon kind of competitor, but using Ether and Ethereum-based tokens instead of US dollars. And basically we launched it and no one was using it. And there just wasn't really a good impetus for people to share their grants and to give. So at that time, we had just read the CLR paper from Glenn and Vitalik, and luckily enough, we're able to hook up with them and put together a matching round of $25,000. And that was a success. And then we did another round for $50K, which was round 2. And then it really started to take off with round 3, which was DevCon fall of last year. And basically, I'll tell you the numbers. Basically, round 1 had around 200 contributions. Round 2 had about 400 contributions. And then round 3 had 2,000 contributions. So almost up by an entire order of magnitude. And basically, and round 4 is on track for like 5,000 contributions or something like that. So basically, the thing that we realized was that people didn't read and understand how powerful CLR is until we put it into our user interface. So basically, if you go to the Gitcoin grant, it'll say, if you contribute $1, then it's worth $100 worth of matching. And just that visceral $1 can generate $100 is really what got people to shill their grants and to get really excited about it. So just that was a lesson learned. Take all this complicated token engineering and formula and just make it into a visceral a value, like something that lets the user know how much value they're getting out of it. And that's a good way of whetting your appetite. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll stop there. And if people have questions, then I'd be happy to answer them. There's lots of interesting things about CLR, and you know, there's like civil resistance and collusion resistance, and basically managing and maintaining all that is sort of like the bread and butter of what Gitcoin Grants has been doing for the last few rounds. Although it gets harder as more and more people get eyes on it, that more people get incentivized to attack it because there's more money in it. So yeah, that's sort of I guess like a very brief 5-minute intro to Gitcoin Grants. Happy to take any questions or to jam at all.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
First, are there any immediate questions?
Yeah, with the Patreon piece, the way you guys do the, sorry, I shouldn't say Patreon, the way you do the ERC 1337, you have the approval, right? So if people do an approval, they can cancel it later. So I assume that you're not doing any matching on like long-term multiple stage grants or funding? Like
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Griff. So basically, myself and Andrew Redden and others pioneered the standard for Ethereum called EIP 1337, the lead standard, and it's basically subscriptions on the blockchain. And basically, the whole idea was just sign once and then have the tokens debited out of your wallet every day or every week or every month. And the reason why we were really excited about doing this is that subscriptions basically power the legacy web, like subscription models and ad models. And so we wanted to bring that to Ethereum. And this is back in 2017 when people couldn't conceive of anything outside of ICOs for Ethereum. So I think it was kind of like a radical thing to develop that standard back when everyone was just kind of doing token raises. But yeah, I mean, so on Gitcoin Grants, basically the design is that we solicit a lot of contributions during the rounds, but it turns out that people actually don't just want to get a ton of contributions all at once. It's actually more healthy to get a recurring contributions over time, because people's expenses are basically, they need to pay their mortgage, they need to pay their office space, their electric bill, and those are all monthly charges. And so the idea is that we get a lightning strike of attention with the grants rounds, and then hopefully people are contributing recurring to these projects, and then you'll get funded for times when there's not a grant round. But to answer your question directly, Griff, if a recurring contribution falls during a Gitcoin Grants round, then it'll be included in the CLR match formula. And so one of the things that we really want to enable is, instead of just contributing to Common Stack for this CLR round, being able to just say, I want to support it for the next 4 CLR rounds would be super powerful. We just got to get the Ethereum Foundation to commit to like doing more CLR rounds. I think at this point is sort of the challenge there. But yeah, subscriptions I think are going to be super powerful, and I think that Paul Blurg from Sabler has, in a way, almost taken what we've done with 1337 and extended it. Instead of monthly contributions, which are like subscriptions, he's brought the granularity all down to the second by second level, and you can stream money from one person to another. So I think that that's really exciting also. But yeah, to answer your question directly, Griff, recurring contributions are counted as part of the grant contributions.
Okay, any other questions so far? Okay, I have a question. At the interface, everybody can see when looking at the details of a certain project, there is, for me, a little bit confusing information on, okay, here's the current funding and here's the monthly goal. Because again, thinking in, okay, one-time contribution versus monthly contributions is, so the stats here are a little bit not really clear to me.
Yeah. So that's probably a good piece of feedback on the user interface. People probably don't have a monthly goal so much. Like when we originally launched, we thought there would be a monthly goal for how much funding they want.
Yeah.
We may actually end up removing that field, and it sounds like
okay.
I haven't heard a good argument to keep it. So yeah, maybe we'll remove that sometime soon.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's something people can add in for themselves, right? If they have a monthly goal, they can say it but it may not be standard.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Talking about monthly or goals, maybe Griff, what's your goal to achieve via the Gitcoin grants? Not content-wise,
well,
but amount-wise.
Another thing that I don't know if everyone knows, but and might need some clarification, but I saw something that said the top 10 people that get the most endorsements or donations actually end up getting a guaranteed 10K of donations. But I'm not sure exactly what that means. So, but that's our goal. Our goal is to get into the top 10 so that we can, you know, to get that bonus. But I'm not sure, does that mean like 10K total, including the amount that was donated? Does it mean 10K just from the CLR matching? And does it mean top 10 for media and non-media or development?
I don't know who guaranteed 10K if you're in the top 10. I think that might have just been someone making an estimate of there's 125K in the round. The top 10 projects will probably get around 10K total. But yeah, there's no guarantee as far as I know. It sort of depends on the distribution and the weighting of how long is the long tail with grants as far as I know.
And Michael, do you have with CatCat, what would be the ideal outcome?
Well, for me, I actually would love to see recurring donations. So to kind of go back to what Owaki was just saying, we don't plan on making a ton all at once or making really big bounties. We're looking at what we're 100 to 500, depending on the scope in the sort of project that we're defining, but we want to keep this rolling. So although it would be awesome to have a bunch of donations and to be able to say, hey, we raised a ton of money, I put a monthly target of, I think, 1,500, and that was with the goal of being able to sort of stream grants out.
I need to finish the community update and she's not replying.
Please mute.
I need to, sorry.
But it's frustrating.
Nice, you have to mute.
This is the time when I usually release it. Like, it's my evening that she's taking.
All right, so to finish what I was just saying, ideally we'll have a slow rollout of large bounties for continued contributions to tutorials and building out sample models. And we want that to be an ongoing thing more so than a big project, because we think the community engagement will be higher if it's sort of structured as, you know, maybe 3 of them running at a time. And we just want to make sure that we have the ability to put up new ones based on the completion of certain things, and ideally have them build on each other and build in the directions that the community is most interested in.
But now, at the moment, this again, when it comes to the interface, at the moment, you don't have, or also the mechanism, you don't have an incentive when it comes to the matching amount to do recurring contributions, right? I think that's at least the effect. Everybody can try it, no matter if you contribute 10 DAI as a recurring or 10 at once, there's no difference.
For the matching in this round, I think, right? Right, Kevin?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know when round 5 will be. So it's not possible. You know, we could provide a preset that would say contribute this round and next round if we knew that date. So it's something that we're hopefully going to set up for round 5 and round 6.
Okay.
Guys, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I have to run. I have an 11:30 over here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of Common Stack and CAD, and I just tweeted that I contributed to them on Gitcoin Grants. So good luck to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Owaki.
Another feature that they added that's really interesting is now you can chat in the grants and start having conversations. I just saw that today.
So I really wanted to talk about, I'm a little disappointed that we lost Owaki for this part, but I really wanted to talk about their token engineering process, because at the very least I will sort of frame what they did as a token engineering process. So he described this recognition about the sort of misalignment in matching campaigns on the part of Glenn and Vitalik. And so what you could say that they did was they reframed the underlying optimization problem that the matching, the sort of pairwise matching could be described as solving. And so a token engineering problem generally is something where we look at the way a certain thing works, we represent it by some algorithm, even if we didn't think of it as an algorithm before, but we say, oh, this algorithm is matching a scarce resource, this matching algorithm is providing a scarce resource allocation problem. Well, which scarce resource allocation algorithm is it using? Does that scarce resource allocation algorithm fit what we feel is right for this community, for this situation? And if it doesn't, you can define a new one. And so with the CLR, they essentially used a different optimization problem to describe the task of taking information from the community, i.e. their donations, and then to allocate this scarce resource, which is the matching funds. And so this is actually a broad class of problem. And while the CLR is an incredibly interesting example, like the matching one-to-one, it has an underlying set of assumptions. And I wouldn't argue that they're the wrong ones for this case, but what I will argue is that it's not a solution in its own right that you copy and paste. It's a solution in the meta sense that they've demonstrated the power of asking questions about what's the right way to solve the problem at hand. And so I would describe this exercise as token engineering. Token engineering is the recognition of the misalignment, the framing of the problem, and the proposal of a solution, and then ideally, using mathematics and simulations to sort of feel out the consequences of the change that you're trying to make, and then ultimately getting that algorithm designed into a tool, and that tool delivered to the public. And I think a really important aspect of what Owaki brought up was that despite all of that work prior and the paper publication, the community itself didn't engage with the mathematical design. They engaged with the visceral experience of seeing the matching. And so we even see this in the broader engineering discipline where most engineers manage complexity. They do work behind the scenes that people don't see or don't appreciate to understand and then fit a solution to a context. And in this case, our contexts are communities. And so our communities, they're heterogeneous, they're different. And we need to find ways to make mathematical tools or mathematical engineering and imbue it in software that meets the needs of a community and then manage the interface between that complexity and that community so that they can receive the benefits of that engineering without being forced to sort of understand it. Rather, the success is inherent in their visceral response to it meeting their needs. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I really want to bring this back around to token engineering education, understand not just why we need it, but how to do it and to see it when it has happened. Because obviously it's a new term. We've just started using it in the last 2 years and it's slowly growing, but it's not like you're only a token engineer. If you say, raise your hand, I'm a token engineer, this process that I just described, this is token engineering.
Brilliant.
If I can summarize that quickly, it's that the user doesn't need to know everything that's under the hood. They can drive the car or they can use the internet without understanding how a combustion engine works or TCP/IP protocols. You can just use it. So the complexity is there on the engineering levels, but the user just interacts with the product. So that's essentially the difficulty that we need to manage, that complexity with token engineering, that it's complex under the hood, but what we present to people to use needs to be simple and intuitive.
And we create an opportunity for people to participate and engage with that complexity through things like, simulations, like the application that the Common Stack team is building, so that people who want to be involved and want to understand and want to play with it can. There's no intent to sort of obfuscate the underlying machinery, but it's a recognition that there's a sort of choice to engage with that rather than you can't use this thing unless you understand all the sort of mathematics and algorithm design and sort of dynamic optimization that might be hiding under the hood. We want to solve those problems in a way that is sort of from first principles, but then we still want to give people a solution that feels right for them and the ability to dive in and see what's happening if and when they're interested.
And this is essentially why the Common Stack is approaching our grant from this perspective, because we want to give people a tool that allows them to have something tangible in their hands to understand what we're working on, because that's one of the biggest roadblocks we've come across so far in our project, is explaining the complexity and coming up against all sorts of roadblocks of people who don't understand it or don't know why it needs to be so complex and so on and so on. Meanwhile, we're realizing we just need to provide the complexity has to be there on the engineer's level, but it doesn't have to be what the public is seeing. They just need to see, you know, a common simulator that would allow them to understand what we're working on without having to go into the mathematics of the augmented bonding curve, for example.
Any other comments? Griff, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, at the end, the devs that end up playing this game, you know, at the end they'll see like, oh, wow, that's what the price ends up being, and this is the grants that ended up getting funded, you know, the proposals that went through. Oh, that's so cool. Why am I manually picking these numbers? I should be able to dev myself away. Like that's the click moment that we hope to get when we give them this model and they can start playing with it. They'll be like, oh, well, I shouldn't be manually just guessing this thing. I should be using CatCAD to be running parameter sweeps and do like a lot of simulations and find out what optimizes this end goal. And if we can get that click moment, people will understand the power of doing robust token engineering.
You're muted.
A lot of people do, and I wanted to comment that, you know, while we're talking about this grant here and we're doing a lot of community engagement, you know, there's a slow and deep trend towards more of this. I saw a cadCAD simulation of the beacon state of the Ethereum 2 design of, you know, a week or so ago from a recent PhD grad in engineering. I saw designs for sort of bonding curves coming early on before the now launched Molecule platform. I've seen, I've worked on projects related to sustainability and projects related to community currencies, and like there's just, there's actually a real thing here and people are doing it. And actually one of the oddest things about it is that because of the complexity, it's actually happening a little bit more behind the scenes than people realize. And so what I want to do with this outreach here is sort of make people more aware of that and give people the opportunity to engage and participate, so it doesn't kind of happen behind the scenes without them realizing it, and then later being like, oh man, I wish I had been a part of that.
Brilliant. And I hope we can also push this in our community. Also the parts where people are maybe a little bit hesitant. So, oh my God, this is all about algorithms. There are many more things to explore and to test, especially when it comes to the final interface and the information given. This is also has a huge impact on how people will behave, and also in designing the entire system prior to modeling and doing simulations. Okay, there was another question on our agenda to discuss, an interesting one. Why are we voting with money, actually, here in this case at Gitcoin? And I think, Jeff, you want to talk about this.
Yeah, I suggested this question because this was a big thing that kind of confused me when I first started researching the blockchain space, is that we were suddenly using these tokens, which are a currency in a lot of examples of cryptocurrencies, but we were also using them to vote. And I was, you know, really confused in the beginning about voting with money. And I mean, this specific grant is a little bit of a different instance, but I thought it would be worth exploring a little bit the overlaps between money and stake in a community, for example. And also how that could be dangerous in a plutocratic system where you can buy influence in a community, and how we can mitigate the dangers of that with you know, mechanism design through proper token engineering and simulation and everything else. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, or if.
I mean, I always have things to say, but I talk a lot, so I can wait.
Same here. I feel like we have so many people in the call. I mean, does anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to say something about voting with money and their thoughts on it?
I will see this. Oh, go ahead. Go, Trent. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Here, I'll put on a video for a second too. So actually, the comments before on, what amount of complexity do you want to pull up to the interface higher level? And, that was a challenge that they had with the quadratic funding. And, they chose to pull up a certain amount. And it's an interesting challenge. Just by background, we were building CAD tools for circuit verification for analog designers in my previous company. And it was a challenge because the analog designers don't want to know statistics, but we were building a tool with statistical characteristics for analog designers. And so at first we didn't pull up any of the statistical stuff, but we realized there was one little piece that if we pull up, it gave them 90% of the benefit of the information, and that was the confidence intervals. So we would say, for example, the yield is estimated to be 97%, plus or minus 1.2% or something. And the plus or minus 1.2% was really critical. And there's more to it under the hood, a lot more to it under the hood than that. But that was really useful. Or another example is we would figure out the relative impact of each of, say, 50 different design variables. This transistor's width, this transistor's length, etc. And but that was actually also a statistical estimate. So the problem was sometimes it would have false positives, other times false negatives. It would say this transistor has 5% impact. The engineer knew it had no impact, and they'd say, what's going on? So we would actually give a confidence interval on that as well. And so overall, the reason I'm describing this is, I think that concept generalizes, and you guys were talking about it before, and in the sense of the quadratic funding in Gitcoin. So I think Gitcoin actually did strike a very, very nice medium. Zooming in on sort of the highest impact piece of what's going on under the hood in a way that people can kind of get it, right? And I think that's figuring out the theories around how do you do that for any given token engineering problem is kind of an open question, right? And I think the stuff that you guys are doing, I look forward to seeing the more sort of refinements of that particular rule of thumb, right? And the experiences you guys are describing for to what amount of complexity should be described to the community for CAD, and so on, right? And the related things. So I think it's great questions in the UX and the relationship between algorithm and UX. And I see that there's always this sort of marriage. You can't design the UX without the algorithm, knowing the algorithm below, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
If you design them, co-design them at the same time, it's incredibly powerful. So that's maybe my concluding thought there. So keep going. I love all of this, so please don't stop. And it's really cool to see everyone here today.
I wanted to hop back to the question about voting with money, as much as I love talking about CAD. But because I think it's actually really important from a community, a token engineering community level, that we understand that tokens, first order, are just provable, like, sort of pieces of state. So, engineering systems deal with state variables and the state of a system and the evolution of the state of a system and the way in which actions mutate the state of a system, etc. And one of the things that can be designed is simply state variables that represent things that are not money. And in the case of commons, for example, while we have interfaces between money and tokens, we're not always going to create tokens which are themselves representations of money. For example, a voting right could be related to some historical behavior that sort of we decide is sufficient for participation, but you could still only have a unique vote. Obviously, there's a very, very broad class of what I would call coordinated decision-making algorithms. I would go beyond calling them voting, because voting brings to mind a handful of algorithms that were designed for fusing information from individuals at the literally write something down on a piece of paper, hide it, and count them up fashion. That's an algorithm. In fact, it's constrained by our ability to count things, like basically to collect and count them up. And so one of the really interesting phenomena about this sort of blockchain and sort of crypto-enabled, zero knowledge state type of thing that's going on in the technology world right now is that our equipment, our feasible set of or implementable algorithms for collecting people's input on things has grown so much. And so I tend to think of them as social sensor fusion, or as sort of tasks that's job is to capture a noisy, decentralized, time-varying signal about what people want within a community, large or small, and fuse it into a coordinated decision. And when framed that way, voting is one such solution, but in fact, like, all sorts of different constructs make sense. And so I would step away from thinking of it as voting with money and move it towards just generally asking, what is our coordinated decision algorithm? Under what conditions should someone have the right to participate? If they're participating, what means of contributing information should they have? And how should their information affect the coordinated decision? But back to the discussion of complexity, at the end of the day, we don't want that to be what we're explaining to people. We want to show them visuals and help them understand the impact of their decisions. And there were some really cool slides and discussions out there around conviction voting, which is one of the pieces of machinery that we've worked on with the Common Stack to help actually resolve this social sensor fusion challenge without thinking of it as voting with money per se, and actually sort of, you know, feeling out some of the sort of visceral disconnects between voting as we do it now and the kind of communal decision making we want.
Erica, do you have a comment? Okay.
I think there's some interesting additions that the quadratic can bring into these systems. So in conviction voting, for example, it's kind of a continuous preference broadcast. So there's maybe 3 proposals on the table, and maybe you say, you know, I support all 3 with 33%. Maybe you say I'm 50-50 for 2 of them and 0% for the other. So this is basically, this is work based off of the social sensor fusion paper that Zargham put out. So this is basically, you know, trying to figure out a collective decision from a group of people who are all feeding their inputs real time into these proposals. Now you may ask the question, if Griff has 1 million tokens and I have 100 tokens, won't the system just be captured by Griff? So this is where quadratic voting could be combined with conviction voting, so that this is kind of like a tacit power sharing agreement that the people who have more stake or say in a community are sharing some of that with minority holders, because overall for the whole community, it is important for minority opinions to be heard. So rather than, you know, otherwise I might feel like I'm not heard at all and I'll just leave the community, which leaves, you know, less people to deliver a valuable opinion. And then, you know, the community as an organism is worse off overall. So quadratic voting could be implemented in a token engineering composable mechanism that includes conviction voting to balance out the whales with the minority holders to make sure everyone is heard.
One thing that's cool about conviction and quadratic voting in their relation to each other is that in a way, conviction voting manages the sort of time distribution through effectively a low-pass filter, and the quadratic voting manages the spatial distribution. So assuming that you have strong enough identity to sort of use the quadratic voting machinery, you actually can, if you use them both, essentially do some rebalancing in space and time. Conviction voting managing some of the noise over time and avoiding sort of attacks of the form, ta-da, I showed up and I made a big swing, because of the slowing effect. And the quadratic voting managing the sort of disproportionate weight of a whale. So in systems, we often deal with fundamentally space and time. And it's actually kind of cool to see that the algorithms that are coming up and getting people's attention actually both deal with these 2 key dimensions. You know, how is the spatial dimension, you know, people, one person having too much sway, versus how is the temporal distribution, someone making an attack by making a last minute move that people didn't see coming, affecting the outcome.
Yeah,
and you meant,
sorry, well, that's the big piece with voting with money versus quadratic voting, is that, or versus one person, one vote, is that if you don't have any strong civil attack measures, then voting with money is like, oh, well, $1, 1 vote, and we know there's only $1. So it's kind of like its own little civil use case. Of course, that's not a good solution when you're voting on the legal age of smoking tobacco, but if you're distributing funds that were contributed into a pot, and the more you contribute, the more voting power you get, then it's a little bit more fair. It's still probably, and that's why quadratic voting is great, because you want some level of plutocracy in those situations occasionally, because obviously if one person puts in $10,000 and one person puts in $20, their influence should be different over how those funds are spent. However, there is also value in the fact that these two different people have different perspectives, and those perspectives are valuable. And so it shouldn't be a 1-for-1, in my opinion. There should be extra value in a new perspective. The challenge is we need very strong civil attack prevention measures, and Gitcoin is there as a centralized identity oracle to check these things and verify people. They're using GitHub a little bit, or a lot. They use GitHub logins to do a little bit of civil protection, but there is this potential of it being attacked and giving one person, a bad person, extra power because they're attacking the system. So these are it's all about design and what are your parameters, what system are you working with? Do you have a natural identity system in place? If so, then yeah, quadratic voting for the win, right? But if not, then maybe you need to, and let's say you have an open bonding curve that anyone can buy into. You don't want to you wouldn't want to use quadratic voting because one person could just use 10,000 accounts and buy one token with each account and then have way more influence than the rest of the people. So it's all about your design space and what you're working with.
Okay, I just want to pick up, before we come to the actual contribution demo, I want to pick up two interesting comments in the chat. One is we might run CatCat simulations as part of the results of this Gitcoin grant funding. Have some bounties, make a tutorial, and simulate CLR mechanisms. This could be super interesting and also valuable for the community and for the development of Gitcoin grants. And second, legal and token engineering. So Anja made a comment, and yeah, I only can agree to Zed's response. It would be super interesting to have a better understanding and maybe explore some opportunities how to fuel in legal understanding to token engineering questions. Okay, thanks for that. Now, since we have just a couple of minutes left, I would love to do a demo contribution to show everybody how this works. We will also record this and then share it with the community again. Anybody up for volunteering to do a demo contribution? Otherwise, I do it myself. Okay, I share my screen. Wait. Yeah, there you go. And show you how it works. And in case I get stuck, you'll help me. Okay, here's the grant contribution page, in this case, CatCat. There we have the activity, the description of the project, and then also all recent transactions. So you can check out who contributed and how much. Here we have the subscription, as mentioned beforehand, and also the contributions already existing, 33, and 3 active subscriptions. And there you can also see the amount of DAI who has been contributed. So it's quite a broad range. However, in average, it's not a really huge amount. What's interesting here is this area. As we mentioned, UX, your contribution goes a long way. So here are proposals. If you contribute 1 DAI, then this will be the result from the matching pool. And of course, you can play around with it as well. And then if you go to fund this grant, you can choose how much you want to contribute. And what's important, this needs to be connected with your MetaMask wallet. And it's also important to check, sometimes this creates hiccups, that your MetaMask wallet is connected with Bitcoin, right? In case it isn't already connected, you have to connect it. And then you just choose how much you want to contribute. And this is also part of the information that is given. 5 dice will result in 66 additional CLR match. If I now go for 10, I can increase. Go for 100, it's even more, and go for 1,000, it's even more. But if you take a look at it, it's not, let's say, a linear proportionally result. I go for, how much should I go for? 10. Then I can choose if it's recurring or if it's just one time. You can go for it's 6 times payment period, 30 days, and this would result in total of 60. However, if you look at the interface on the left, it doesn't matter if it's recurring or just a one-time contribution when it comes to the CLR matching. So I do a one-time contribution. This is additional information on how much you want to support or add as a support to Gitcoin, or it's a share basically. So 5% of those 10 DAI will go to Gitcoin. And then you choose the gas fee and just push contribute to grant. And then that's it. You have to confirm that at the MetaMask interface, I think twice. And then the transaction is running and hopefully confirmed in a couple of seconds. Let's take a look. Yeah, confirm. And that's it. So it's pretty straightforward, but the magic is, if I do it, it's okay. If we all do it, it really makes a difference. So I really invite you to contribute to CatCat, to contribute to the Commons Stack. And hopefully we see in the next 16 minutes ago, 27 minutes ago. So there are already people currently contributing, and I hope we will see many more in the next minutes and days. Keep in mind, it's until 21st of January. And yeah, then hopefully we can do a lot of productive work for the token engineering community. Is there anything else I should share, or any questions on that? Some questions from Jeff.
Yeah, I'm just engaging on the legal discussion with Anja there on how these kind of currencies are, it's not just a currency, it's not just an equity, it's not just a stake in a community. There's kind of like blurring definitions between these. So I think there is definitely a lot of room for legal engineering and how, you know, existing legal systems or existing taxation systems will look at, you know, self-taxing currencies or self-taxing communities where they're basically internalizing the externalities. Tax is almost like a post-redistribution. We can now build pre-distribution into these community currency architectures. So it may require some legal engineering and how that will be looked at by existing regulatory bodies.
Cool. Looking forward to this new branch of token engineering activities.
Yeah, I think that it's probably really important that we look for a future opportunity to do a legal-centric token engineering call, because there's even been a handful of conversations sort of, you know, on the side of this meeting and broadly in the community around these interfaces, and there really is no one one right answer. That's not like we can say, you know, a priori that like there's an optimal. In fact, I think the word optimal is sometimes a dangerous thing to carry forward when we're talking about these complex social and economic systems. There may really only be something sort of appropriate or fitting or like useful to the communities that it's supporting. And we have to look at ways to engage with that and ways to manage the sort of the safety and the general like acceptance of the people that these systems support. And in fact, you know, law as a construct serves a role in how people who are managed by systems in turn manage those systems back.
Okay. So if there are no other comments at the moment, we will share this video I think in the next hours. Please share also and spread the word on the grants, and then looking forward to the next steps with Common Stack, with CatCat, with legal, and pushing forward our activities. Thank you all for joining, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Angela, for hosting.
Definitely, much appreciated, and great to get all these conversations out.
Yeah, really. Thanks a lot for everybody joining us. Thanks a lot for a lot of new ideas, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. See you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Man, we had a lot of cool people join.
Absolutely.